and welcome. It is so good to have you here. My name is Andrew Grozer. I am the State Director for Alphacrucis College. For those of you who maybe are a little bit unfamiliar with Alphacrucis College, we are a Christian tertiary provider and we exist to equip Christian leaders to change the world. And so we care about leadership, and that's why we are so grateful that you would make the time to come and to invest in your own journey of leadership. Your leadership is important. People look to you, especially during times that are a little bit more ambiguous, and during uncertain times, people look to you to lead them. And so that's why it's so important that you invest in your own leadership. So thank you very much for coming. Shortly, we are going to we're going to talk about a particular leadership topic with two outstanding guests. And but near the end of our time together, we are going to have some live Q&A. And so we've already had some great questions come through during the registration process. And but if, as we're discussing some of the subject matter, maybe as questions surface, why don't you capture those and put them in the Q&A function. We will, the chat function is to kind of engage with some of the subject matter or with the other attendees, but the Q&A will be what we are going to explore together near the end during our Q&A time. So again, welcome. So good to have you here. We are going to be talking about resilience in leadership. And let me tell you, if you're a Victorian in 2020, you need resilience. Of course, we've got attendees from right across Australia, but I'm just trying to elicit as much sympathy for the plight of Victorians as possible. The reality is that we all need resilience. If you are a Christian, you need resilience. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Timothy that all those who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Thank you, Paul, for those encouraging words. Appreciate that. But if you are a Christian, if you're a human, you need resilience. If you are a leader, you need resilience. Yeah, there was some interesting recent polls by the Barna Institute over in the States that asked pastors and leaders the question of what are some of the key challenges that you face in recent months. And 35% of them said that they are struggling with personal burnout, and 34% responded with personal discouragement as a leader. So in amongst all the issues that they are facing, it came back to the things that they are facing internally as a leader. In a more recent poll, again from the Barna Institute, 1 in 5 pastors admitted to their emotional well-being being below average or poor. There's 20%. That is, usually that statistic is closer to 1%. So it's very important as leaders, because the nature of leadership is that you are going to face adversity. And of course, resilience is the capacity to recover quickly after facing adversity. And so very, very important. I'm reminded again of the Apostle Paul's words in 2 Corinthians, where he said that we are hard pressed on every side, but we are not crushed. And he goes on to describe his particular state. And of course, he's describing resilience, this sense of with God's strength, like we are being battered on every side, but we are still persevering and still continuing. And so the question is, how do we get there? How do we become resilient? How do we become like Paul, where we are hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed? Are we simply stuck with a level of resilience that we're born with? Like, is it a fixed asset, or does it grow? Well, we've got two outstanding guests with us today that can help us explore that further. Our first, Pastor Alan Davies. Now, Pastor Alan really barely needs an introduction. He is the Vice President of the Australian Christian Churches, has been for many, many years. He has founded numerous organizations. He was the senior leader, the senior pastor of a significant and thriving church in Melbourne Southeast for 3 decades. And currently he is the director of ACCI, the International Relief and Missions arm of the Australian Christian Churches. Now, what some of you may not know about Pastor Alan is that in addition to his Bible college studies, he also, his undergraduate and his postgraduate studies was in the area of psychology. And of course, the discipline of psychology is where a lot of research in terms of resilience is coming out. So Pastor Alan, thank you so much for making the time. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to today.
Great. Well, our second guest is Dr. Beck Lounder. Now, Dr. Beck Lounder is the head of our social science program at Alphacrucis College and is also a practicing clinical psychologist and has been practicing for over 25 years. So it's fantastic to have her. Now, she is passionate about the well-being of leaders and has worked with leaders right across the nation for many years. So, Beck, it's great to have you with us as well.
Good morning and thank you. I'm really like Alan. I'm really grateful to be here and looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Fantastic. Well, let's set a little bit of context for where we are headed. Start with you, Alan. You've occupied senior roles for many years, pretty high senior roles, and have had to face some pretty difficult situations. I don't think there's a whole lot that you haven't had to face. I mean, you were vice president of the ACC during the time of the Royal Commission. You had to change the code of conduct for an entire denomination. Of course, that kind of brings a whole bunch of stuff up. I'm sure there were some difficult challenges throughout your tenure of senior leadership, both in terms of the organizations that you founded and the church and personal things. So I'm sure there's so much that you have had to face in terms of difficulty. Can you take us back to one particular time where it was a pretty significant challenge for you? Tell us what was going on and how you were able to overcome during that time.
Yeah, well, I think, it's pretty obvious that the ministry is something that throws up continuous challenges to you. It doesn't matter what aspect of ministry you're in, but in the pastoral ministry particularly, it's just one problem after another, really. I mean, people think that they get over this and then they're going to get to some clear air, but actually what happens is problems continue to arise, and those small things can accumulate over a period of time and produce a lot of stress and anxiety in your life, and it can affect you in various ways. And then, of course, with that underlying level of difficulty that you're facing and dealing with, there can come some serious other problems, some personal, some to do with church life. For me, probably the biggest thing that ever happened to me at that level, in the middle of everything, while being state president and vice president and all the rest of the other stuff, my daughter became very sick, went into hospital and had was in a coma for 6 months, had to have several brain surgeries, etc. And during that time, it was very easy, and with the pressures of everything else, to start drifting away in your thinking and your attitude about things, and start to become less, I suppose, connected in many ways. The idea, you want to disconnect. During that time, I think I had to come back to the basics. And I think, to me, the basics are very important, especially in times like this. I had to rethink everything and rethink about, why do things happen to people? Why do bad things happen to people who perhaps are not even that good, but why do bad things happen to people? And take a biblical perspective. And when I step back and look at the Bible, I see that actually it's a book of resilience. Just about every character in the Bible has a resilience story, and the scriptures are full of it. And the founder of our faith, Jesus Christ, was, the whole story of his life and death is a resilience story at some levels. So for me, I had to take a look back and think that when difficult things happen, it's not because something might be going wrong with me. It may be that difficult things are a part of life, that they are the fabric of life. It's the way life is. And if that's the case, then there's certain things I have to keep in mind. And never change my mind, never go there, never allow yourself to question certain things. There are certain givens, certain unchanging things that you have to hold on to, like anchor points in your life that'll hold you right. The first, of course, is that there is a God, and he's with me, and he loves me, and he cares for me, and he has a plan for my life that hasn't changed, though I'm going through difficult times. There is a purpose in this that I don't understand yet, that's a greater purpose than I may ever be able to understand. But this is part of the process of life and faith. And that if I maintain my faith in God during this, don't doubt that he loves me, he cares for me, there's a plan for me, there's an outcome in this that God has determined. There's a greater purpose in mind. And if I keep that in mind and trust him in all of this, and just put my trust in God to allow the process to unfold without me letting go of the essential points of truth. And I found that really helped me. I found it took me through. I found there were days when questions would come into my mind, but I just wouldn't go there. Why is God doing this to me? What have I done wrong? Doesn't God love me anymore? Why doesn't he listen to me? Why isn't he answering my prayers? Put all those things aside. And I trusted him. And I found that those things brought me through, Andrew. They were the best things I could do.
I was possibly going to cycle back to this later, but let's just do this now. So what role does the spiritual life play in helping you maintain your resilience?
For me, I think it's the most important role, your spiritual life, because the other things you can do, yes, you can keep your social networks going, you can talk to people, etc. All of that is always very, very important. But for me, the central point was maintaining my relationship with God and my faith, because to me that gave meaning to everything. Without it, there's no meaning to all of this, the things that are going on in my life. So it was a matter of maintaining the spiritual disciplines in my life. It was a matter of understanding the bigger spiritual picture of my life, to see that this is not a random event, that I'm not being punished, that this is life. These things can happen to people. And that's the purpose of my faith, actually. That's the reason why I believe. That's the reason why Jesus Christ came, to enable us to conquer and endure, persevere, and have resilience through all these problems. So I felt it was the central aspect of my dealing with these issues.
Yeah, brilliant. So for you, what were the spiritual disciplines that you were engaged with?
Well, again, I think the simple things are sometimes the most powerful things. So obviously there's your daily reading of the Word of God. Don't let it go. God spoke to me a multitude of times because I literally just forced myself to sit down, get a cup of tea or coffee and read for 15, 20 minutes. And God spoke to me at those times. It's a matter of prayer. It's a matter of just talking to God. And even if you're saying the same thing, even if you think your prayers are not being answered, but it's a matter of praying. It's a matter of opening your heart and your mind and allow the presence of God to be there with you. And if you can't feel it, you still know that he's there. And there is that darkness that the ancients used to call it the dark night of the soul. And yeah, there is a darkness, but God dwells there and you're confident he is there. And so for me, the other aspect of that discipline, of course, is worship. And just worshiping him when I don't feel like it. Play some good music, just lift your hands. If you can't sing, don't sing. Just be worshipful, even for a short period of time. And of course, stay connected with the people of God. Go to church. You don't feel like it, go to church. You don't want to be there, go to church. And then connect with people and talk with people. To me, all of those small disciplines formed a strong foundation, and just persist with them. And you know that this is not forever, it's a season, and you'll come through.
Wow, that's quite profound. I can only imagine what it would have been like to go through that journey with such a dear loved one. Obviously, those things kind of helped you. That quite a crisis moment. Do you think that resilience is important just for those crisis moments in leadership, or is it for more mundane, everyday leadership situations?
I think there is a very strong aspect where you have to develop a resilience in your life for even the smallest of things. It's a resilience that takes you through times when you're weary, times when you're a little bit depressed, maybe times when you're disappointed, discouraged, so, sometimes when you think that you failed, times when you think you're not loved, not understood, not cared for by people. All of these things are going to be part of the fabric of life and ministry. And that's where resilience is extremely important at those times as well. And I think that without resilience, most people are going to quit in ministry and leadership, because resilience is really essential to a good leader and a spiritual leader.
Wow. That's brilliant. Beck, I want to bring you into the conversation. You do some work with leaders and care about their well-being. To piggyback off Pastor Alan's comments, that you do need it really for everyday things and kind of build that sense of that reservoir of resilience. What are some of the more common leadership challenges or resilience challenges that leaders face?
Look, I think they're varied. I mean, obviously very individual, but at the same time, some of them come back to some of the things that Pastor Alan was just saying. And I often think we have to understand more and more the overlap and the integration of what happens in our personal life can also happen to us or influence our ministry or our professional world as well, that we're a whole being. So be it if we're at home or in a work or ministry space, that our well-being is actually coming through, it's affected in both spaces. I think challenges can be varied, which can be, so therefore when someone is having a personal challenge, if they haven't maybe reached out and got their own support, then as they're trying to support and encourage others, it can be implicated in some way, and their own well-being when they get home, for example, might not be in too good a place. I think as well, the idea, especially one thing that I'd say we've been seeing at the moment with COVID, is that often when we support other people, there's a balance of issues that people come forward with. With COVID at the moment and a lot of the experiences, especially the challenges with stress and to well-being, is that as people who are in leadership roles, we're experiencing the same situation as those that are coming for support. And within that, a weariness can come, a little bit like what Alan spoke about. And we see these sorts of things, they can happen right through from the everyday and mundane through to sort of significant life events as well. And so therefore, when we consider resilience, it's really looking about a person's ability to be able to pause, reflect on what's happening with themselves, and to be able to, I think, the more self-aware we can become, and this would be an area I think often that's really important for growth, is the more self-aware we can become, the more then we can learn how to manage and how to develop and grow and continue to build those foundations. We can be more aware of what we're going to go to God about, because we actually with the self-awareness, there's often a sense of vulnerability and a bit more of an open heart, that we're more teachable, and therefore we can sometimes even be more open to the Spirit as well, and really in a place where we can welcome God into our space more and more, and sometimes into those areas of life that we might not really have a great deal of insight into ourselves yet. And God himself can help bring clarity. Sometimes when Alan spoke about that dark place of the soul, sometimes God dwells there, and sometimes we need some strategies to actually be able to allow his light to permeate those areas so we can continue to grow. And therefore our resilience, which is about our ability to bounce back from adversity and know and have strategies and skills in place to manage going forward, we can therefore then be ready for that a bit more.
So, Beck, the way that you're talking, it seems like you're saying resilience is not a fixed asset. Like it's something that we can actually grow in. Is
Definitely.
that, yeah, you would agree with that?
Oh, I agree 100%. Resilience is, well, it is. I mean, I guess all of us are built with the capacity, if we're made in the image of Christ, and Christ is the most resilient of all and the perfect example of resilience in his absolute nature. I think there is so much that we can therefore learn. It's in us. However, it is something I think we need to develop and work on. And even in those times of both the everyday, it's so important what we do in the everyday, because that actually as well, I think, builds this reservoir of capacity and strength and even faith for when we actually reach the troubled times that do come our way. all of, as Alan said, it's not, you know, that I'm a bad person or those sorts of things. Challenges in our world, it is part of our world. And so therefore, resilience too can actually build and develop. And there's, again, the research, you know, and there's such a large amount of research now that's really looking at what are some of the pillars or the tenets, those core tenets of resilience, as well as really acknowledging now, which I think is wonderful in a broader space, the spiritual aspect of resilience as well, or the spiritual aspect of our well-being, and really acknowledging that even beyond the church or beyond sort of religious or faith-based organizations and faith-based institutions, that there's a greater acknowledgement that spiritual well-being is an integral part of where it's meaningful for an individual. It's an integral part of their well-being and their capacity to be resilient as well.
Fantastic. So, okay, if resilience is something that can be built, and if I'm hearing you correctly, we're saying that it's something that you work on ahead of time before you need it, and that resilience grows over time or can grow over time. Alan, let me ask you, talk to us about some of the people that you work with a lot these days. And I mean, they can be a pretty hardy lot, fairly resilient. How do they get there? What are some things that they do to kind of help them become more resilient?
So most of the people I think you're talking about are missionaries, and the ones that have been on the mission field for a reasonable amount of time, you know, several years, have developed quite a high level, shall we say, of resilience. The reason for that, I think, is if you see the path they've been on, they have had to dislocate from their culture, their family. They've had to dislocate from their language. They've had to dislocate from all the things that were comfortable and supporting for them. And then they relocated to another country without those supports, without their family, and they had to reconnect. That means reconnecting to another culture, reconnecting to another place, another climate, another lot of food, another language. So in doing that, they were forced to adapt and to change. Now, driving all of that was a sense of purpose. I'm called by God for this. I have a task to perform that's God-given. I have a cause that I'm there to uphold and to promote. I am here to help people. I'm here to do something of significance that's going to be significant in other people's lives. So these people have made this transition of being driven by a strong sense of purpose and cause, a strong sense of destiny, if you like, a strong sense of doing something really significant to help other people. Consequently, when they're in those times now, they are tolerant of ambiguity. They're not asking for answers all the time. They know some things are difficult to understand and they won't have answers. They're also tolerant in regard to time. Things are not going to happen immediately. Things can take longer. They're not demanding of instant results and instant solutions and things that must be solved immediately. They're willing to be, well, biblical word, I suppose, is patient, a bit more patient with things. They have a feeling, I suppose, that they are not in control, which is true. And they're in another culture now and things work differently now. And they're working with national churches now and they have very little that's under their direct control. But they learn to work with others and network with others. And they're very good networkers. They really connect very well with people. And they can learn that though they're out of control, in a sense, they can't directly control things. They can be involved in a process and accept that lack of control, but work with others to produce things that they need to get done. So they actually work better with others to achieve things because they're in less direct control themselves. They also see obstacles not as something that stand in the way and are preventative to them, but they actually see obstacles as anticipated things that are going to occur that you have to overcome. So missionaries are always presented with amazing obstacles and they're very creative as to how they overcome them and how they work their way around them or how they provide innovative solutions for these things. So these are the sort of people that they are. And because of all of these things, they're exceptionally resilient people. It has been something that develops in them. Yes, we do some training in their pre-field work, resilience training, and we talk to them about resilience. But really, I think it all starts from that whole idea of a very strong sense of purpose, that they're going to uphold and promote a cause, and they have a sense of doing something not for themselves but for others, and that drives them forward and enables them to develop all these other characteristics, I think, that make them such powerfully resilient people.
That is brilliant. But what I'm hearing is, you want to be resilient, sign up and become an ACCI field worker. But the needing to face obstacles and learning to overcome is part of the process of becoming more resilient. That's beautiful. Beck, I'm curious, what are some other things that people can do to build their own sense of resilience?
Yeah, look, I think it's building on what Alan's already said. And one of them is what we've talked about already, a little bit about self-awareness and starting to understand how a person's going, like being able to, as well as knowing what our strengths are, and also those areas. We always talk about our areas for improvement and our growth areas. It's very important that we stay, and that's where up to date with that, and staying aware of that. Accountability people can be very helpful in helping us understand that. I think one thing Alan mentioned there about the sort of adaptability and flexibility, we talk about that as well as our ability for a person to be able to maintain attention, but also there to the activities and maybe the tasks in front of them. What are the things that are working for them, maybe that are a bit of a struggle? And with resilience, we see that a person needs to have both the ability to be flexible, as well as also be stable and have stability of focus and stability of purpose and stability of thought. If we think of some of those original ideas of the term of resilience that came from the engineering field, and we think of how a building's built, both when an engineer is determining the resilience of that building, they have to look at the stability of those foundations, but also the flexibility of the building for it to be able to withstand the pressures that go around. And sometimes while the building's being built, there's a need for scaffolding. And similarly, we sometimes in our developmental stages, both as leaders and of those we're leading, we act sometimes as a scaffold and have different support structures. But as a building goes up and as we continue, there's all different forces will come against a building. It's the resilience, and it's those internal, I guess, the internal factors within a person and those strengths that help them. So in addition would be even a person's ability to sustain and understand their emotion. You talked before about emotional well-being being affected at the moment. Our ability to manage our emotions, our thoughts as well, or our cognitions, the way in which we think as those thoughts come in, what do we do? Do we listen to sometimes that self-talk? Is it helpful or not so helpful? And again, resilience on the everyday. Okay, resilience, we look at both factors and the strengths within us. Okay, and what it is that makes me, but also we have to look at what's external and who's external to us that we can draw on to help build our resilience. And so with that, sometimes with our emotional well-being, as well as our psychological and the thoughts that we encounter, the ability to be resilient actually requires of us to continue to work at sometimes we need to really do a lot of reframing and see things a little differently, like the obstacle that Alan talked about for missionaries. Is it something in a negative sense? Or it sounds like these missionaries and field workers look at this as an anticipated positive challenge. What am I going to learn from this? What skills am I going to get to apply? That also helps with resilience. Sometimes we have to understand what we need to let go of as well. There's going to be certain ideas and thoughts that come our way, and we need to understand what are the core important things. Sometimes when situations and challenges, what are the things I can manage and influence now, especially with ambiguity and uncertainty, but also what are the things that I can even sort of take a hold of and really learn and develop in. I think our social connections and our ability to connect with each other, as well as a broader range of people around us that are going to help us develop and grow, is critical. In recent years, thank goodness, we've seen a reduction in people's sort of maybe fear or apprehension about seeking professional help. And I think we can never underestimate the value I guess, and accessing professional support, both from a more supervisory wellness, well-being perspective, right through to when some other things are going on for people, such as if they're experiencing issues relating to anxiety, depression, or other psychological concerns, that there's actually a way in which people can reach out, get some strategies and skills beyond their current support network to actually help them continue to build resilience, especially in light of whatever the struggle or the situation is that a person's experiencing. And I guess as well, coming back to always basic self-care, we have to be responsible for, ourselves. We've been given, now we talk about wineskins and fresh wineskins, and we need to ensure, okay, that we are keeping ourselves healthy and well so we can continue to be that vessel for God to work through. And with that comes our requirement and responsibility for self-care, which might include our nutrition, from the basics of how we're going with exercise, what's our sleep like, what's our screen time like even at the moment, our ability to stay present. We sometimes talk about what's called a window of tolerance, which is the space in which we're mentally and emotionally engaged. And sometimes when pressures come our way, we can sort of jump out of that a little bit and not do so well. So I think the more in which we can develop self-awareness and self-care, that also helps us build our resilience.
Well, let me probe a little bit further. How do I build my self-awareness?
Sure.
How do I increase my ability to be aware of myself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that we're not always, it's a great question. So I think with that, often I find a really helpful way is even breaking up breaking down, I guess, even the different areas of well-being in our life. It might be our emotions, our thoughts, it could be our spiritual self, it could be our physical, environmental is even the space that we find ourselves in, and actually going through it and even saying on each of those areas, what's working for me? What am I even doing to build and attend to these areas? But also, where might I need some growth as well? Because self-awareness, it allows us to really monitor and consider what are our thoughts, what are our natural ways of even thinking and responding to certain situations. Sometimes it's even touching base and understanding what might our interests and our hobbies and our strengths actually be. So self-awareness as well, it relates to when under pressure, how am I likely to respond? If someone cuts me off in the traffic, what do I do? If I keep getting the text message from the same person, or I've got a lot of messages today that I need to do, how do I actually sit at the end of that day and both know where I have to have my boundaries in place? Because boundaries are critical as well, and with resilience. It's our ability to be able to help when we can, but when is it appropriate to pause and take breaks? And those sorts of factors help us really become more and more self-aware. And there's just certain questions and resources as well there.
That's great. So carving out some time to actually think about your thoughts, think about what you're thinking, how you're framing certain situations. Okay, that's very helpful. So resilience is something that we need to work on sort of every day in one sense, in preparation for the adversity that just being a human will kind of bring our way. But sometimes we just wake up, we just find ourselves in a situation that we are unprepared for, that we are struggling with. I know during this COVID season, I mean, I'll be the first to put up my hand. I've probably had about 2 or 3, like just really dark days, just wow, really, really struggling. So what do you do? I'm going to ask both of you, what do you do? Not what the literature or the research states, but what do you do when you find yourself in a dark day? What's your self-talk? What's your, what type of things do you do to address that? Maybe Beck, will start with you.
Sure. Oh gosh, there's many things. And again, for me, yes, I have to make sure I don't just go straight to the literature, but I want to also think about what have I learned over time as well. And I think one of them is actually, if I notice I'm not having a great day or it's a not so good day, I actually want to, rather than sort of going down that black hole, I guess, it's actually try to pause and notice what's going on around me. What sort of sleep did I have? What have I got on today? Am I concerned maybe about some deadlines I'm needing to meet? What's actually happening? So again, that's an area, I guess, of self-awareness. It's then looking at how is it that I can be as well as staying accountable still to what I need to do, how can I show myself, and this can sometimes be a struggle, some self-compassion to say, you know what, it's actually okay. You don't have it all. It's not all worked out, but we've got some healthy strategies and ways forward. And so therefore for me, it might be taking my dogs for a walk. It might be doing something with my children or my husband and children that I might really enjoy. It might also be having a bit of time out. It depends on what I might need and what might be happening in that time. But also reminding myself how I've managed troubled times or challenging times before, and that I can do it again. Sometimes it's a bit of a conversation to myself that says, Beck, pull it together and just get on with it. Let's get to the day, not letting my feelings rule me, because sometimes our feelings, we can nearly believe something's going to go wrong just because we're not feeling so great. Okay, but if we've got a whole lot of things in place, that sometimes we need to write out those feelings so we can keep actually moving forward. And I think as well, we'll come back to that later, some other strategies, but because it's more about me. But I do think, yeah, it's actually sometimes pausing, getting a cup of tea, getting into the word, but also sometimes putting on some worship music, right through to going for a walk and actually just taking a moment to regroup, pause. I always say pause, reflect and regroup and get going again. That would be what I do.
Right. Thank you. Alan?
I think one of the problems, and Beck's touched on this, is that in these times, your thoughts tend to get in a bit of a groove and tend to be repetitious. And you tend to find yourself going round and round things all the time. And they're basically the same fundamental things. And you just keep going over them and over them, worrying them that how do I solve this? What's happening here? What does this mean? And we start to build something from nothing, actually, then. We start to build things, we imagine things. We infer things that are not there, and it can get worse. So one of the things that I do always is, and you've talked about this, is of course, I identify those thoughts. Hang on a minute, I'm in this process now, and you've got to break that process, which means that you move away from it. So for me, that doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the issue that's in front of me, but it means I'm going to control the way that I'm actually approaching this in my thought life. So for me, I mean, I tell myself, hey, this isn't forever. This is going to come to an end. There is an answer to this, and I'm going to be praying about finding God's answer, God's solution as to how I can get through this. I think I say to myself, it's not my fault. No, by then I'm not blaming other people, but I'm saying this isn't because God is punishing me for something I've done wrong. So between me and God, check it out, pray about it. Everything's okay. That's the most important thing. Now then, connect with people. We all have, there's a strange way of looking at it, but I think in life you have many sorts of relationships. And there's one category of relationships which I call therapy people. They're really good for you. Therapy people, it's like, you can have a dog, it's a therapy dog. And honestly, a pet can sometimes be your best friend in these times. They give you unconditional love. But there are therapy people too. And I try and connect with the therapy people. The people who make me feel better. I don't have to tell them everything. They're not my confessors, but they're just being there. Their spirit, their attitude, their view of life is very uplifting for me. And so I connect with my therapy people. They'd probably be horrified to know I call them therapy people, but they're my therapy people. And some of them haven't got a clue. But also, I engage in activity. I think when you're active, your mind doesn't run around in these circles all the time. You've got to give your mind something else to do. And that's not just playing computer games or getting onto the internet or, into social media, which sometimes doesn't solve your problem at all. That can be more stressful. It doesn't mean vegging out in front of television. It means a real activity. An activity where you yourself are engaged in it, where it requires your thinking and it requires your action. No, if that's going for a walk, that's fine. If it's playing a sport, that's fine. But you need to find some activities in your life that will pull your mind away from these repetitious cycles of thinking and give it something constructive to do. I find when I do those things, it helps me. It helps me to break these cycles in my thinking and helps me with my resilience.
That's great. You talk about doing an activity, and I'm curious now, that photo that you've got at the back, is that one of yours? Because I know that you enjoy photography.
It is one of mine, yes.
There you go.
One of mine. And I love this picture. It's a bay where I sometimes go for holidays called Kitty Miller Bay in Phillip Island. But I'll tell you a story. When I took this picture, there was a young man standing next to me. and he was at the same time with a camera equally as good as mine, no problem at all. And he looked at the picture and he took one shot and turned to me and said, "Nothing much happening tonight," and walked away. I waited another 5 minutes, being more resilient than him, and got this beautiful picture.
That is gorgeous. Absolutely love it. Definitely transporting me to where I want to be right now. Of course, I'm in Victoria, so I'm not allowed. So that's brilliant. Beck, let me just, as we near the time for Q&A, what does the research and the literature say that to help us in the moment of our sort of dark days, etc.?
I think, you know, we learn so much from research and the continual research. Interestingly, one aspect at the moment where we're seeing a lot of research is this idea of actually self-compassion in relation to resilience. And self-compassion is actually about ensuring we don't see ourselves as needing to be perfect. It's actually seen as a moderating or a mediating factor that can actually help bring about our ability to respond. So it's about some of even the ideas that Alan was just talking about. Sometimes our thoughts can get into these patterns where we ruminate or think over and over on the same issue or whatever it could be. A self-compassionate approach will actually say, hey, let's get our mind off that for a while. Let's move to something else. And so self-compassion is actually, it's an interesting term. Often, especially in leadership roles, we have a lot of compassion for other people. But within leaders, it's actually very important that we can actually pause and give ourselves a little bit of compassion as well. Meaning it's different to sympathy. Okay, compassion is actually saying it's okay to not have it all together. Because when we can pause and reflect, we get, just like Alan's photo there, he paused a bit longer. And look at the beautiful photo he took. Sometimes with our own lives, when we can pause and reflect just a little bit longer, we get a whole lot of different insights that actually help us to continue to build and go forward. As well within the literature, and even in the literature at the moment, looking at it for frontline workers and for leaders, it's about actually ensuring we have some staples in place or some standards in place. So for example, some people can feel really out of control at the moment and have done, especially with rules, our freedom being limited more than what we might be used to, a whole range of rules. And so often to actually counter ambiguity, and also this is in resilience to help mitigate and manage some of those challenges, it's actually bringing back a bit more certainty in our space. And so having a routine and a healthy and a helpful routine can be a great example, or one example, allowing ourselves and ensuring we're doing some things to get present on a day-to-day basis. It can be it's very easy to find ourselves just staring at a screen going, what, I've been on social media for an hour, or I've been watching, I'm up to the 3rd episode of a show and I didn't even realize because we've come home and we're feeling pretty lousy about whatever it could be. And so therefore, when we can work on being present, which means being intentional and in the space that we're in now, we're able to engage with our thinking a lot more and also be able to believe in our capacity to manage, the challenges that are before us. So we've talked about day-to-day being resilient. But if we look at resiliency in relation to when those challenges do come our way, also a key aspect of resiliency is how do we learn from the negative or the challenging experiences we have, so we can know even how to respond a little differently next time. And so therefore, openness to learning, I would say, is another key factor that's also found in the literature around resiliency as well.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you. All right, I've got another question that I want to end with. So what we're going to do is we're going to move now to some of the Q&A. As I said, there's been some great questions that have come through. Here's one from Noriko. How do we know when our resilience are low? Like, is there a way that we can evaluate our level of resilience? Beck, maybe I'll ask you.
I think, again, our ability, if we're starting to notice, and also like even in relation to burnout is often another common question we have here. If we're starting to notice our ability to engage in our day-to-day is reducing. So if we're noticing ourselves losing focus, concentration, you've driven from place A to place B, but you have no idea how you even got there, through to, for those who aren't actually able to be out on the roads at the moment, possibly finding yourself just sort of zoned out a lot of the time or highly reactive Do you mean that no matter if someone just looks sideways at you, you're finding yourself responding in ways that you're not used to? For many in leadership, you might also find keeping starting to notice a difference between authentically showing yourself. Is it that people are seeing the real you, or are you noticing it's still like, I've got to keep this mask on because if I don't, do you know what I mean, I'm going to let everyone down? And we start to see a separation of, usually we see a coherent self being presented, but if we're starting to notice two different people nearly, not in a pathological way, but in a way that we're really having to pretend to be someone publicly and be someone very differently at home, then that might be another sign that it's really important. Okay, it's not about judgment in those situations. It's about the self-awareness. If we're noticing we're struggling, then it's about actually going, well, maybe my resiliency isn't where I want it to be. And so who is it? Is it my therapy people through to the therapist, who you would actually want to have somebody who is actually professionally trained, who can actually help a person where it's beyond what someone's actual support network can provide. And that's also another way to, I guess, self-reflect on where we're at with our resiliency, is if we're noticing we've gone a bit off.
That's great. Here's another question. Maybe, Alan, I'll direct it to you. In a marriage situation, how do you support your spouse when they are weary in leadership without dictating to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, dictating to them is going to have the opposite effect of what you want to achieve. I think there's obviously, it's showing that you care, showing that you understand. I mean, being willing to give them the time that they need and the space that they need. And sometimes gently, very gently, leading them to away from the issues that are causing them stress and difficulty. It is very hard trying to help somebody else who's going through this unless they realize that this is going on in their own life. If they're not self-aware, as we've been saying, then bringing self-awareness to somebody else is a challenge because it can be seen as something that is intrusive and they can resent it. So I think it's more being very sensitive to them. Just have a look at what they're willing to listen to. Be wise. Don't be how could I say, too forceful about this. Don't be preachy to them, but just gently get alongside of them, understand them, pray with them, listen to them. You don't have to correct them all the time. If they want to let it all out, let it all out. If they want to be angry with people, let them be angry with people. It's not wrong. We don't have to stop them doing that. And then when we've listened to them, then gently lead them away from that type of thinking, introduce a few suggestions that isn't a direct contradiction to what they've been thinking, but have you thought of this? So maybe, yeah, I understand, that's good. And then move them on to some other aspect of thinking about it so that we're helping to renew their mind, if you like, to introduce new thoughts and new ideas, rather than just forcing it or preaching at them, or that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. That's a bad example. They will not work when people are seeking resilience.
Yeah. That is profound. You really do need the wisdom of Solomon sometimes, just trying to navigate those situations. Alan, let me ask you another one. This comes from Alex. How do you deal with continual disappointment?
Well, yeah, it's a fabric of life and ministry, actually, isn't it? I think one of the things you have to do with continual disappointment is, first of all, ask yourself, what are these disappointments all about? Let's identify them. Are they disappointments because I always are seeking to accomplish too much, too quick, and I'm always disappointed? Then pull things back a little bit. Am I being disappointed because I have such high expectations of other people? Well, maybe I should have a few less expectations of other people. Am I being disappointed because I thought things would turn out better than this? Well, then that's the fabric of life. So I think when we're looking at continuous disappointments, we may sometimes have to look at ourselves as to why we are being disappointed all the time. And I think then if we're saying, well, oh, I think that's all okay, I think my expectations are acceptable, then I think we need to learn to deal with the disappointment. And the disappointments that we're experiencing, are they in others? That's a whole different strategy of accepting people, loving people, even though they're disappointing us? Is it within ourselves? And again, we come back to this, that we were just talking about, and Beck was talking about this self-love, if you like, and give yourself a bit of space for your failure in expectations. If it's a general expectation in life, then you're just going to have to moderate your responses to that. It's not the end of the world to be disappointed. It isn't the end of everything to be disappointed. It's not a catastrophe here. You can stop, you can think about what caused it, you can think about how you can change your approach to it, and then you can move on despite disappointment. Because if you give up on disappointment, you're going nowhere at all. It's there all the time.
And based on some of the conversations that we've been having, the more you continue to persevere through that, the more your resilience will grow.
Exactly. It grows. Yeah.
Right. Okay. How can we help those we are leading to help build their own resilience? We have a responsibility for us to be resilient ourselves, but how can we help others, those that we lead, kind of grow in their level of resilience as well? Any thoughts there?
I think, first of all, obviously, to me, the obvious first thing as a minister is I have to show resilience myself. I have to be a resilient person. And so I'm going to show by the way I live my life that I am resilient. That is in times when I am obviously disappointed and there's something everybody's looking at me and saying, well, he's disappointed, or he must be discouraged because of that, or he must be annoyed because of that, or how is he going to respond to this failure? I have to show resilience there. And that helps to build it in them. Even though they might not know what it is, they see it modeled. Now, we're not going to be perfect and I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but it ought to be our aim. Second thing I think we need to do is create an atmosphere of resilience. That is a place where resilience is valued, where we encourage resilience in people, where we teach resilience, where we get people together and actually we address the issue of resilience. As to how we're coping with things and how we can cope better with things. I think that's extremely important. If you're creating that environment of resilience and you're an example of that resilience, and then you feed into that resilience teaching, understanding of it. And if you teach people how to be resilient in different situations by using various examples, we can do it in our preaching. We don't even have to call it resilience. How did Job overcome this problem? How did Elijah overcome that problem? We can do it on our personal levels of teaching and discipling people. But I think that's one of the things we have to do constantly. It's not something that comes up when trouble comes. It has to be continuous.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Just quickly, we've got another couple. Beck, here's one for you. So somebody that's been struggling on and off with depression and anxiety, but feels the calling to be a pastor, has currently got their probationary minister's credential. Wondering what advice you would recommend. So this person has been on and off struggling with some mental health challenges. What would be your advice there?
I think number one, thank you to the person who would actually reach out and ask what to do, because sometimes it takes a lot of strength to let somebody know that there's this, one's heart is to serve God and you've got yourself ready in that probationary space, yet you're also experiencing these other challenges. I think if there's possibly a mentor in your world or somebody else who's possibly gone through that ministry journey before, very helpful to align yourself with them, because they can help you through some of that process as well about, like working out what it's going to mean to be in the ministry. But at the same time as well, as when anxiety and depression or other factors are a struggle, ensuring that, it's actually helpful to reach out for professional support. Interestingly, one of the recommendations that did come out of the recent Royal Commission that looked at, that included the broad church's response to institutionalized abuse, one of the recommendations that did come out of that is that all people in pastoral ministry engage in supervision or in some kind of accountability practice. And so therefore, when people can actually engage in both that process or even more professional help to deal with those, about even to seek to understand how or why or where those the idea of anxiety and depression has come from, as well as helpful strategies, That's where people who are psychologists and clinical psychologists are trained specifically to actually support people and help them work through those issues. We know wellbeing sits on a spectrum, and sometimes we can be at an end on that spectrum of wellbeing where there are significant challenges that require, in addition to our regular support network, they require extra support. And sometimes it could be worthwhile checking in with someone. Go to your GP. Currently with COVID, there's been an increase in sort of support and mental health support from our government in Australia. And so therefore there's extended services available to people. And if they need to reach out for that support, it can actually be a very helpful thing to do.
Fantastic. All right, one more question from our attendees. Alan, I'll direct this to you. If you are feeling defeated where hope is lost, for example, death of a loved one, should I pull back from frontline ministry if I cannot speak or sing about hope until I processed it myself? What do you think?
Well, I suppose I have a bit of a particular attitude about this. And no, I don't think you should pull back. I think if you don't have a sense of hope, you must ask yourself a question. Do you still believe in hope? And if you still believe in hope, if you still believe that hope is important, then I think that you should continue to minister hope, even though you might not feel it. Because I think, to me, you see, hope is something that may diminish during those times, but it will come back. You will have a rise of these things in your life. If you abandon talking about it, singing about it, preaching about it, teaching about it, then you're moving away from it. So the old preachers used to say, you know, I'm going to preach healing until I see someone healed. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to preach faith until my faith grows stronger. And there's this idea that, you know, you don't back away because you have a sense of something that is lost, but that you keep on ministering that thing. You keep on promoting that thing to others. And in doing so, you keep on promoting yourself because you still believe in it. If you've lost faith in hope, if you have no faith in hope, if all hope is gone and you feel you don't believe in it anymore, then you need to seek counsel. You need to go and sit down with someone and say, listen, I'm having a serious crisis here of faith. And they're not unusual to have a crisis of faith. And if you can't continue to believe, then you really need to sit down with someone, whether that's a counselor for your mental and emotional well-being, or whether it's a spiritual counselor. But you need to sit down and talk about that issue because it's vital to you, especially in ministry. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Apologies to the rest of the attendees who have submitted some questions. We've received some great ones, so just run out of time to be able to address them. Beck, Alan, I've got one more question for you. Beck, we'll start with you. What is one thing that you would want our listeners to do before their head hits the pillow tonight?
I think to pause and actually just think about something that they're grateful for that has gone well today. So it's more than one. And also remember to pray and talk to God about maybe that one thing that you're grateful for.
Great. Alan, what about you?
I think I would like them to sit there or lie there and think about what their purpose in life is. What are they called to do? They're a unique individual and they have a unique God purpose in life. Think about it. It's not always in the big things. It can be in many levels. And think about what your purpose is on different levels and get a sense of cause and reason for being and the reason for what you're doing. That stay in touch with that. I think that helps take you through all the most difficult times of life.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Excellent. Well, man, we have covered so much territory. Thank you so much. In the chat right now, we will put up links as to how you can connect with Beck and her work at Alphacrucis College, and how you can find out about the great work that ACCI do here in Australia and globally, right across the world. So you can click those links. Please engage with that. Thank you so much for coming. Really do appreciate your investment in your leadership. Thank you, Beck and Alan, for your honesty, your transparency, your wisdom, and thank you for showing resilience yourselves, because it's out of that experience that you invest into the rest of us. So really appreciate that. If you have enjoyed your time with us or have found it helpful, we have another webinar in October. I think it's October 21st with Dr. Van Shaw talking about Christian spirituality, Christian and spiritual disciplines, etc. And as we've heard even today, the importance of that in building your own resilience in leadership. So once again, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Beck. And thank you, everybody, for attending. God bless you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.